My wife, 25 years younger, cheated on me with my cousin for years. But when I discovered the truth and confronted her, she didn't know I had secretly annulled the marriage and left her with nothing, while my family destroyed them both. I'm 54 years old. I work in commercial real estate investments, and what happened to me a few months ago with my wife, my ex-wife, well, the woman I thought was my wife, basically made me realize that you can share your life with someone for years and not know that person at all. I guess I should start at the beginning. When I met Adriana at that charity gala in Manhattan about 5 years ago, because looking back, all the signs were there from the moment I saw her. But I was so blinded by, I don't know, loneliness, ego, the desire to feel alive again after the death of my first wife, that I simply didn't want to see it. My first wife died when I was like 38 years old. It was sudden, a brain aneurysm that no one saw coming, and I was left alone raising Sophie and Ethan, who at that time were 8 and 6 years old respectively. I spent the next 11 years completely focused on my children and building my business, turning pain into work and dedication. And the truth is I worked pretty well because by the time I turned 49, I had a portfolio of commercial properties in Manhattan that was worth, let's say, enough that I never had to work another day in my life if I didn't want to. My kids were already adults. Sophie was at Columbia studying law and ethics in his last year at Dartmouth, and for the first time in over a decade, I felt like I could, breathe a little, live for myself. Then came that night at the plaza, one of those boring galas where everyone goes to show off their donations and wear expensive clothes, and I was there basically out of obligation because one of my partners was on the organizing committee. And I saw her there, Adriana, standing next to the bar in a blue dress that probably cost more than the monthly rent of an average apartment in the city. And she immediately caught my attention, not just because she was beautiful, which she was, like magazine model beautiful, but because she had this way of moving, of talking, that made everyone in the room look at her. She was 24 years old at that time, me 49, and yeah, I know what you're thinking, but I swear at first I didn't even consider that she could be interested in me. I thought it was just polite conversation when we started talking about her work at an art gallery in Chelsea. But it turned out she was interested, or at least that's how it seemed, because after that night we started going out. First it was casual coffees, then dinners at expensive restaurants, weekend trips to the Hamptons where I have a house I built years ago. And honestly, it was like being in my 20s again, except now I had the money to do all the things I dreamed of doing when I actually was in my 20s. Adriana was fun, spontaneous, always wanted to try new things, go to new places, and after more than a decade of just being dad and businessman, it felt incredible to have someone who made me feel young again. 6 months into dating, I officially introduced her to my kids, which was honestly a bit awkward because Sophie was only 3 years younger than Adriana, and you could see on her face that she was making a huge effort to be polite. Ethan was easier. He basically just wanted me to be happy, and if Adriana made me happy, then he was fine with that. I also introduced her to my extended family, including my cousin Phoenix, who at that time was like 39 years old and worked in, or rather tried to work in, various tech startups that never really took off, but always had flashy names and impressive PowerPoint presentations. Phoenix had always been the type of family member who shows up at gatherings with a new, brilliant business idea. And the story of why his last venture didn't work wasn't his fault, the type. But he was my cousin, and we'd grown up together, so I always maintained a cordial relationship with him. I remember perfectly the first time Adriana met Phoenix at a family dinner at my Hamptons house. Must have been like 8 months. After we started dating, Phoenix arrived with his usual energy, all smiles and firm handshakes, talking about his new startup that supposedly was going to revolutionize I don't know what e-commerce thing. And Adriana seemed fascinated, asking him about his plans and his visions, and all those things that Phoenix loved to talk about. At that moment, I thought it was nice that they got along, that my girlfriend and my cousin had good chemistry, because it meant Adriana fit into my world, God, what an idiot I was. Like 2 months after that dinner, Phoenix came to my office in Manhattan with an investment proposal for his latest startup. Something about an artificial intelligence platform for market analysis or some such thing. Honestly, the technical details escaped me, but the presentation was professional, and he was asking for only $200,000 for the initial phase. What convinced me? and I'm embarrassed to admit this now, was that Adriana had been talking a lot about how smart Phoenix was and how she believed. This time, he really had something special. And I thought, well, he's my cousin. 200,000 is nothing to me. And if I help him, maybe he'll finally succeed at something. I signed the check that same afternoon. A year into being together, I proposed to Adriana on a yacht in the Mediterranean. We rented the boat for a week and sailed from the French Riviera to Capri. And one night after dinner on deck under the stars, I pulled out the ring, a 4-carat diamond that cost me more than what some people earn in 5 years, and gave it to her. She cried, or at least seemed to be crying, said yes between sobs, hugged me, the whole perfect romantic scene you see in movies. We started planning the wedding immediately. She wanted something big, and I was willing to give her whatever she wanted because, honestly, at that point in my life, money was just numbers in a bank account, and spending it to make the woman I loved happy seemed like the best possible investment. The wedding was in the gardens of my house in the Hamptons on a Saturday in June. We invited like 300 people. There was a huge tent with crystal chandeliers, a live band that played for 6 hours, food from a chef who had 2 Michelin stars, wines that cost more per bottle than a new computer costs. Adriana looked absolutely radiant in a Vera Wang dress that cost, I'm not exaggerating, $45,000. And when she walked down the aisle toward me with her father, who had flown from Colombia just for the wedding, I remember thinking I was the luckiest man in the world. Phoenix was there too. Of course, he was one of my groomsmen, gave a toast that made everyone laugh about how I had finally found someone patient enough to put up with my long work hours and my obsession with the real estate market. What no one knew, literally no one, except me and a lawyer in the Dominican Republic, was that 4 months after the wedding, I went to La Romana and quietly annulled the marriage. I'm not proud of this, but I don't regret it either, because what I discovered in those 4 months made me realize I needed protection. I needed an exit. I needed to be able to control the situation if things went wrong. What exactly did I discover? Well, several things. Small details that individually didn't mean much, but together painted a concerning picture. Messages on her phone with friends talking about my money in ways that made me uncomfortable. Conversations I overheard by chance where she seemed more interested in my investment portfolio than in me. The way she always found excuses for me to put more properties and accounts in her name. So, I went to La Romana because I had researched that the Dominican Republic has annulment laws that are, let's say, more flexible than in the United States. Hired a local lawyer who knew exactly how to handle these things discreetly, and basically got the marriage annulled for technical reasons related to documentation. The paperwork was legitimate, completely legal, but Adriana had no idea. We kept living as husband and wife. She kept using my last name. We kept sleeping in the same bed in our penthouse in Manhattan or at the Hamptons house. But legally, I was a single man, with no financial obligation to her in case of separation. It was my insurance policy, my emergency button, and it turned out to be the smartest decision I made in my life. The next 3 years were, from the outside, perfect. We traveled constantly. Paris, Tokyo, Dubai, Maldives, basically anywhere. Adriana mentioned she wanted to see. I organized the trip. I bought her designer clothes, jewelry, a Mercedes-AMG just because she mentioned she liked how they looked. I gave her access to several of my bank accounts, gave her practically unlimited credit cards. Basically treated her like a queen, because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You give them everything you can give to make them happy. My kids had graduated from college by then. Sophie was working at a law firm in Manhattan, and Ethan had moved to San Francisco to work in tech. And although neither of them was exactly a fan of Adriana, they kept the peace for me, made the effort to come to family dinners and be polite. Phoenix was still part of our lives too, showing up at family dinners every 2 or 3 months, always with new stories about his startup that, surprise, still wasn't generating profits but was about to, just needed a little more time, a little more capital. I had already accepted that those $200,000 I lent him were basically a gift. I didn't expect to see them back, but Phoenix kept promising he'd pay me back with interest once the company took off. Adriana, and he always seemed to get along really well at these gatherings, They'd talk about technology and market trends and all those things, and I was glad my wife and my cousin were friends. I thought it was a sign of a united family, you know? But then, like a year and a half ago, things started to change subtly. Adriana started staying out late more frequently, always with excuses about dinners with friends or gallery events where she still supposedly worked part-time, though honestly, she didn't need the work because I covered all our expenses. She started being more distant at home, spent hours on her phone, and when I asked what she was doing, she'd just say she was on social media or chatting with friends. Our sex life, which had never been extraordinary but at least existed, basically disappeared. Every time I tried anything, she had a headache or was tired or just wasn't in the mood. One night, must have been like a year ago, I got home early from the gym and heard her talking on the phone in our bedroom. The door was ajar, and her voice was loud enough that I could hear from the hallway, though it was obvious she didn't know I was home. She was talking to someone, probably a friend, and said something that stuck in my memory. Samuel is boring as hell. Honestly, sometimes I don't know how I put up with his conversations about properties and investment returns. But he's stable and has money, and that makes it all worth it for now. For now. Those two words hit me like a punch to the stomach, but I didn't say anything, just stood there in the hallway processing what I had just heard. And the following weeks, I started paying more attention. Not obviously, but vigilantly, observing her patterns, her behaviors. I noticed she smiled more when she was on her phone than she smiled when she was with me, that she dressed up more for her supposed outings with friends than she dressed up for our dinners together. I started doubting everything, questioning myself whether I was being paranoid or if there really was something wrong. And the uncertainty was almost worse than knowing the truth, because at least the truth gives you something concrete to fight against. Then one day, must have been like 10 months ago, Adriana left her phone on the kitchen table while she showered. Normally, I would never have thought to check her phone. I trust people until they give me reasons not to, but something in me, let's call it intuition or desperation, made me pick up the phone. It was unlocked. There was a message notification on the screen, and I could see the beginning of the text without even opening anything. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. When do we see each other again? The contact name was just a letter, L, and the message made me feel like the floor was opening up beneath my feet. I heard that the shower water was still running, so I quickly put the phone back exactly where it was and left the kitchen before she came out. The rest of that day was a blur. I don't remember if we talked or what we did. I just remember my mind was spinning, trying to process what I had seen, trying to find alternative explanations that made sense. But the truth is, there were no alternative explanations. The message was pretty clear. During the following weeks, I became an amateur detective. I hated doing it, but I needed to know. I needed confirmation before making any moves. I started noticing that Adriana saw Phoenix more frequently than I thought. She'd mention his name casually in conversations. Oh, Phoenix called me to ask about something. Oh, Phoenix and I went for coffee to discuss ideas about his business. Little things that individually sounded innocent, but together formed a concerning pattern. The confirmation came at a family dinner at my aunt and uncle's house, like 8 months ago. One of those gatherings where all the cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents get together to celebrate. I don't remember what, a birthday or anniversary or something. Phoenix was there with Adriana and me. And throughout the night I noticed things I hadn't seen before or hadn't wanted to see. The way they looked at each other when they thought no one was watching. How their hands almost touched. When passing food dishes, how they laughed at inside jokes I didn't understand. At one point, both of them disappeared for like 15 minutes. She said she was going to the bathroom and he said he was going to get something from his car. And when they came back, there was something in their body language, a familiarity, an intimacy that made me feel physically sick. That night, after getting home, I waited until Adriana fell asleep and then did something I never thought I would do. I took her phone from the nightstand. She always used the same password for everything, her birthday in numeric format, because she was the type of person who prioritized convenience over security, and the phone unlocked without problem. I went straight to her messages and looked for the letter L, and there it all was, months and months of conversations that basically destroyed what was left of my heart. The messages with L, who turned out to be how she had Phoenix saved in her phone because obviously using his real name would have been too obvious, were explicit, detailed, intimate, in ways that made me want to throw up. They talked about their sexual encounters with a level of detail I'm not going to repeat here because, honestly, it makes me feel humiliated, just remembering it. But it wasn't just sex. They also talked about me, about how I was a boring old man who was basically just a source of money, about how Phoenix was taking advantage of my investment in his startup to finance his lifestyle and basically steal from me while sleeping with my wife. There were messages where they literally planned how much more they could get from me before I suspected anything, discussed strategies to keep me happy and distracted while they continued their secret relationship. But wait, because it gets worse. While I kept checking the phone, I found that Elle wasn't the only one. There were at least 3 other contacts with just initials or obviously fake names, and with each of them Adriana had flirtatious conversations, suggestive, some explicitly sexual. Basically my wife, or the woman I believed was my wife, had been cheating on me with multiple men for who knows how long. But the one that hurt most was Phoenix because it wasn't just partner betrayal, it was family betrayal. It was my cousin, someone I had trusted, someone I had helped financially, who was literally stealing from me while sleeping with my wife and laughing at me behind my back. I stayed up all that night with the phone in my hand, reading every message, every conversation, piecing together the complete puzzle of my humiliation. Adriana snored softly beside me, completely oblivious that her world was about to collapse. And I just thought about how I had been so stupid, so blind, so pathetically naive as to not see what was happening literally in front of my eyes. But along with the pain and betrayal, I started feeling something else, something cold and calculated, the determination to destroy them both, completely, to make sure they paid for what they had done to me. And the beauty of the situation was that I had all the necessary tools to do it. The next day, I started moving pieces, silently. First, I called my lawyer. Didn't give him all the details, but told him I needed to start transferring assets and reorganizing my finances in ways that would protect my wealth. I started removing Adriana's name from bank accounts, changed beneficiaries on insurance policies, transferred properties that were in both names to just my name, basically started building a financial fortress around myself while leaving Adriana outside without her having any idea what was happening. All this took weeks because I had to be meticulous. I couldn't rush and make mistakes that could give her legal advantage later. Meanwhile, I kept acting completely normal at home, smiled, and made superficial conversation. We even had sex a couple of times when she initiated because I didn't want her to suspect that anything had changed. It was like living a double life. On the outside, the devoted and trusting husband. On the inside, the betrayed man planning his revenge, and the tension of maintaining that facade was exhausting but necessary. Like 2 months after I discovered everything, I started phase 2 of my plan, cutting off Adriana's access to my money. I canceled most of her credit cards that were connected to my accounts, left only one with a low limit for basic expenses, changed passwords on bank accounts, set up alerts for any unusual transactions, basically closed all financial doors except one small window that I completely controlled. It didn't take long for Adriana to notice the changes. One afternoon we were at the mall. She tried to use one of her cards to buy a Louis Vuitton bag that cost like $3,000, and the card was declined. Then she tried another, declined too. I saw panic in her eyes as she searched her wallet for another card, and when that was also declined, she turned to me and said, "Something's wrong with the cards, can you call the bank?" I acted confused, told her I would when we got home, and paid for the bag with my card just to keep up appearances a bit longer. That night she confronted me, obviously upset, asking what was going on with the accounts, why her cards weren't working, if there was some problem with the bank. I told her calmly that I had been reorganizing our finances for tax reasons and estate planning, that she shouldn't worry, that everything was under control. She seemed to accept the explanation, although I could see she wasn't completely convinced. But what was she going to do? It wasn't like she had any legal right to demand access to my money, especially considering that legally we weren't even married, though she still didn't know that. The next day I went to Phoenix's office. His startup had a shared space at WeWork in the Flatiron district, all very modern and trendy, but essentially empty because his company didn't have real employees apart from him and maybe a freelance programmer. I arrived unannounced, told the receptionist I was family and wanted to surprise him, and walked straight to his desk where he was sitting, looking at his laptop, probably doing nothing productive. The conversation was short and direct. I sat in front of him without invitation and told him, "I know what's going on between you and Adriana. I know about the messages. I know about your encounters. I know about your plan to get money from me while you sleep together." Phoenix's face went from shock to denial, and then, when he realized I knew too many specific details to be lying, to something resembling fear. He tried to stammer an explanation. Something about how things had happened unintentionally, how he had never wanted to hurt me. But I cut him off and told him I honestly didn't care about his excuses, that I just wanted him to know that both he and Adriana were going to pay for what they had done, and that he could start preparing for the consequences. I left his office without waiting for a response, leaving him sitting there processing what had just happened, and I felt, honestly, incredibly powerful, like I had finally regained some control over a situation that had made me feel powerless for months. That night, I had the conversation with Adriana. I prepared the scene carefully, made reservations at one of our favorite restaurants, an expensive French place in the Upper East Side where we had celebrated multiple anniversaries. Throughout dinner, I acted perfectly normal. We made superficial conversation about her day and mine, ordered expensive wine, ate delicious food, and only when dessert arrived and the waiter left leaving us alone, I leaned forward and told her very quietly, "So, how long were you planning to keep sleeping with Phoenix before telling me?" The expression on her face was almost comical. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened, but no words came out, and I could see her brain working at full speed trying to find a convincing lie, a plausible denial. But before she could say anything, I took out my phone, opened the screenshots I had taken of her messages with Phoenix, all the explicit conversations, all the plans they had made, and put the phone on the table between us. "Read them," I said, "and tell me again that nothing's happening." Adriana took the phone with trembling hands, started scrolling through the images, and with each screenshot she saw her face got paler. She tried to say something. I think she was going to try to explain or justify, but I raised my hand and told her, "I don't want to hear excuses. I don't want to hear that it was a mistake or that it didn't mean anything or any other garbage you're planning to say. I just want you to know that this is over. Our marriage is over, and you're going to leave my house and my life." She started crying then. Real tears this time, not the fake ones I had seen so many times before, and started begging, saying she was so sorry, that Phoenix had been a mistake, that she really loved me, that we could get through it together. And here comes my favorite part. The moment I had been waiting for months, I took out another set of papers from my jacket, put them on the table next to my phone, and told her, "Oh, by the way, those papers you're looking at are annulment documents for our marriage, signed in the Dominican Republic almost 4 years ago, which means we were technically never legally married, which means you have no right to my money or my properties or anything that's mine." The shock on her face was absolute, perfect, exactly what I had hoped to see. She tried to grab the papers, but I moved them out of her reach and told her, "You already have enough screenshots to review. You can see the legal documents later when my lawyer officially sends them to you." I left cash on the table to cover dinner, plus a generous tip because the waiter wasn't to blame for serving what was essentially the funeral of a fake marriage, and I got up to leave. Adriana tried to follow me, but I told her to stay, to finish her dessert, to enjoy her last expensive meal on my money because there weren't going to be any more after this. I left the restaurant, leaving her sitting there alone at our table, and I swear it was one of the most satisfying moments of my life, knowing I had finally regained my power, that I had finally shown her and Phoenix that you couldn't fuck with someone and get away with it. The following days were chaotic. Adriana tried to come back to our penthouse, but I had changed the locks. All her belongings were packed in suitcases in the lobby. I had left her her clothes, her shoes, her jewelry, everything that was technically hers, but nothing more. She tried to access the bank accounts, but they were all closed or changed. She tried to use the credit cards, but they were all canceled, except the one I had left with the low limit. Enough so she couldn't say I had left her with nothing, but not enough to maintain the lifestyle she had become accustomed to. She called me like 50 times that first day, left messages crying, begging, cursing, going through all the stages of grief and denial. She also called Sophie and Ethan, trying to get them to intercede for her. But my kids, bless them, basically told her she had made her bed and now had to sleep in it. Sophie specifically told her something like, "I always knew you were with Dad for his money. I'm glad he finally realized it too." Phoenix tried to contact me too, sending me long emails trying to explain his side of the story, but I simply didn't respond. Blocked him from everywhere because honestly, I wasn't interested in hearing anything he had to say. What I did do was call several members of my family, aunts and uncles, cousins, my parents who thank God were still alive though elderly, and I told them the situation, showed them the evidence, explained the betrayal. I organized a family meeting at my Hamptons house like 2 weeks after confronting Adriana, invited everyone, and when everyone was gathered in the living room, I put a presentation on the big TV that I had prepared with screenshots of the messages, evidence of the suspicious financial transactions Phoenix had been making with the money I lent him. Basically a complete exposure of the entire situation. There was shock, there was crying, there was rage. My aunt and uncle, Phoenix's parents, were devastated, ashamed of their son. The family basically collectively decided that Phoenix was no longer welcome at family events, that he had crossed an unforgivable line, and that the family was cutting ties with him. It was hard for them, especially for his mother who couldn't understand how her son could have done something like this, but they also understood that what he had done was unforgivable, that he had betrayed not just me, but the entire family, and that the consequences had to be real. Adriana ended up living in a friend's guest room in Queens. Now actually working at the gallery because she needed the money, her luxury lifestyle disappeared overnight. I know this because Sophie, who has contacts in the art world in New York, heard things and told me. Apparently, Adriana tried to get a lawyer to sue me, but when her lawyers saw the annulment documents and realized we had never legally been married, they basically told her she had no case, that I had been smart and careful, and she had no legal basis to claim anything. Phoenix tried to keep his startup running for a while, but without my continued financing and without access to my network of contacts he had been using to get investors, the thing collapsed in a few months. I heard he had to file for personal bankruptcy, that he lost his apartment in Brooklyn, that he's living with his sister now somewhere in New Jersey. The fall was hard and fast for both of them, exactly as I had planned. Do I feel bad about what I did? Not really, honestly. I feel what I did was justice, that they betrayed me in the worst possible ways and the consequences they faced were directly proportional to their actions. Could I have handled things differently? Maybe less vengefully? I suppose. But I'm not a saint, and when I'm hurt that way, when they make me feel so stupid and humiliated, my instinct isn't to forgive and forget. My instinct is to make sure the person who hurt me understands exactly what they did and faces real consequences. Now, like 6 months after all this, I don't know if I'd say fine, but at least in a better place. I sold the Manhattan penthouse because it had too many memories. Bought a new place in Tribeca, smaller but equally luxurious, a space that's just mine, without ghosts from the past. I'm still working in real estate. My businesses are still doing well because at the end of the day, that betrayal was personal, not professional, and my money keeps multiplying regardless of my family drama. My kids are proud of me, I think, for finally setting boundaries and not letting myself continue being used. Sophie especially has told me several times she's glad I got my dignity back, that it had been painful for her to see how Adriana manipulated me and she couldn't say anything because I was so in love or so blind that I wouldn't have listened. Ethan flew from San Francisco last month just to spend a weekend with me. We cooked together in my new kitchen, drank expensive whiskey, and talked about everything. It was nice to reconnect with him that way. Yesterday I got a message from Adriana, the first in months. It just said, "I hope someday you can forgive me. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I want you to know that on some level, I did love you." I read it, felt nothing, not anger or sadness or even satisfaction, just nothing. And I think that's a sign I'm finally healing, that I can finally think about this whole situation without feeling like my chest is going to explode.